The candles flickered as my daughter raised the knife, her smile sharp as she declared, "Today I cut ties with the past." Gasps echoed, the room froze, and my heart shattered in front of everyone. But what unfolded moments later would change everything, and it will shock even those who think they've seen it all. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The restaurant lights shimmered like soft amber candles across polished glassware and white linen, bathing the room in an atmosphere meant to feel festive, almost sacred. Waiters weaved silently between tables, balancing trays of sparkling drinks and small plates. The hum of conversation filled the air, old neighbors recalling memories, Jennifer's colleagues offering polite laughter, friends snapping pictures on their phones. It was a scene any mother might dream of, her daughter, vibrant and beautiful, stepping confidently into another year of her life, surrounded by people eager to celebrate her existence. I sat near the center of the long table, close enough to witness every detail of her happiness. Jennifer's cheeks glowed with the faintest blush as she accepted compliments on her dress, a tailored sapphire blue gown that shimmered under the soft lights. Her hair, golden brown and curled in waves, framed her face with elegance, and she carried herself with the poise of someone who knew the world was watching. Pride welled in me. 35 years ago, she had arrived into my arms, fragile and squalling, and since then, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every compromise I made with life had been, in some way, for her. The months leading up to this day had been a test of patience and endurance. I had handled most of the planning myself, calling the florist to ensure the centerpieces matched Jennifer's favorite lilies, arguing with the bakery over the exact shade of frosting for her cake, writing checks that stretched my savings thinner than I liked. I did it not because she asked, but because I believed that maybe, just maybe, if I poured enough of myself into making her birthday flawless, she would feel my love again. Our bond had grown fragile over the years, threads fraying under the weight of unspoken words and quiet disappointments, but I hoped this night might sew us back together. The moment before her toast, my chest swelled with quiet contentment. I watched her laugh with her friends, her smile flashing like a promise of better times. My fingers brushed over the stem of my wineglass as I thought, perhaps she sees me differently now. Perhaps tonight we begin again. Then she rose. The clinking of forks against glasses hushed the chatter, and all eyes turned toward her. She looked radiant, confidence rolling off her as though she had rehearsed this moment for weeks. She lifted her champagne flute, the crystal catching the light, and smiled at her guests. Her voice carried easily, trained, clear, commanding. To the people who matter in my life, the future, thank you for being here. A polite cheer rippled across the table. Glasses lifted, smiles widened, and then, in a single breath, she drew a line that cut me from the circle of light and placed me in the shadows. And to the past. Her eyes swept the table, then paused, deliberate, fastening onto mine. The pause stretched just long enough to draw a tremor across my ribs. Thank you for showing me what I never want to become. The words did not drop. They detonated. The silence that followed pressed down like a leaden weight. Forks froze mid-air, conversations evaporated. My hand, still holding the wineglass, began to tremble so slightly I feared it might shatter in my grip. The breath I had drawn caught in my throat, trapped between disbelief and an ache so sharp it felt physical. Her face betrayed nothing cruel. She smiled, calm, as though she had merely spoken a truth that required no apology. Around me, eyes flicked back and forth, guests unsure whether to laugh, to comfort, or to pretend nothing had happened. My sister Linda's jaw tightened. She glanced at me with fury disguised as pity. Across the table, one of Jennifer's friends leaned in to whisper to another, both hiding their smirks behind napkins. I sat there, still. My fork lay heavy on the plate before me, untouched. In the golden glow of the restaurant, surrounded by strangers and kin alike, I felt a kind of nakedness that no clothing could shield. She had not just dismissed me. She had reduced my life's work, my sacrifices, my motherhood, to a warning sign of failure. Shock spread across my chest like ice breaking on a frozen lake, jagged, merciless, unstoppable. I replayed the words in my mind, each repetition slicing deeper. What I never want to become. Was this how she truly saw me? A relic, an embarrassment, a shadow of mistakes she refused to claim as her own. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to keep my face still. If I let even one crack show, the dam inside me might burst before the entire room. Pride battled humiliation, dignity fought against despair. But above all, a bitter truth sank in. This was not an accident. This was deliberate. My daughter had stood before a room full of people and chosen to erase me. The warmth of the restaurant dimmed to me, the golden light turning harsh and foreign. The laughter that returned in hesitant bursts sounded hollow, like echoes in a cave. I stared at her, at the curve of her smile, at the strength in her shoulders, and realized she had built this moment like a monument to celebrate herself by dismantling me. For a heartbeat, the years rewound in my mind. Her first recital, when I had clapped until my palms burned. Her first heartbreak, when I had sat with her on the porch all night, whispering that she was stronger than she knew. Her college graduation, when I had driven 10 hours alone just to watch her cross the stage. Each memory, once a pearl of joy, now cut me like shards of glass. I blinked, the sting of tears threatening, but I would not let them fall. Not here. Not now. Around me, the party stumbled back into motion, voices straining for normalcy. But the damage was already carved deep. My daughter's words clung to me like chains. And as I sat in that chair, in the middle of her celebration, my pride cracked beneath the unbearable weight of public rejection. The night had only just begun, yet everything I thought I knew about my place in her life had already shattered. The sound of Jennifer's words lingered in the air long after she lowered her glass. Conversation resumed in fragments, halting, forced, brittle, as if the room itself didn't quite know how to move on. What had been laughter only moments earlier dissolved into whispers, the kind that glide across surfaces like cold drafts, carrying judgment too faint to hear fully yet sharp enough to cut. Beside me, Linda leaned in. Her perfume, heavy with gardenia, brushed against me as she murmured, "Don't let her do this to you." Her voice carried both anger and pity, but it did nothing to ease the crushing weight in my chest. My eyes were fixed on Jennifer. My daughter, my only child, still smiled as though nothing had happened, her face radiant in the glow of admiration that her friends and colleagues continued to shower upon her. She laughed lightly, even gestured for another glass of champagne, as if she hadn't just torn me from her life with a single sentence. Why would she humiliate me this way? The question repeated, insistent, drilling deeper into the marrow of my thoughts. I searched her face for some sign of hesitation, some flicker of remorse, but all I found was confidence. She seemed proud, triumphant, as if declaring me the past had been her rite of passage into a future she believed I could never enter. My mind spiraled backward, desperate to anchor itself in something gentler. I saw the younger version of Jennifer, 5 years old in her tutu, clutching my hand before stepping onto the stage for her first recital. Her tiny fingers had trembled, and she whispered, "Mom, don't let go." Later that night, she had fallen asleep in my lap, her head pressed against my chest, and I remember whispering back, "I'll never let you fall." That promise had carried me through years of sacrifice. After Gerald left us, the world became a battlefield I had to cross alone, and I fought with bare hands. I worked mornings at the diner and nights cleaning offices, my body breaking but my resolve hardening each time I pictured Jennifer's smile. I stitched her Halloween costumes by hand. I sold my jewelry to pay for her textbooks. I let my own dreams rot quietly in the corners of my heart, so hers could take flight. And through it all, she looked at me with wide, adoring eyes, and said the words that fueled my every breath. "Mom, you're my hero." Now she called me the past. The word burrowed into me like venom. It spread, slow but merciless, filling veins and lungs, leaving me hollow. 1,000 conversations we never finished came rushing back. The arguments about choices I couldn't afford to give her. The times she turned away when I reminded her of limits, when she accused me of not being enough. Had she been storing all of that bitterness, waiting for the perfect stage on which to declare her freedom from me? I felt hatred rise, hot and suffocating, curling not toward her, never fully toward her, but toward the selfishness that had overtaken her spirit, toward the blindness that made her rewrite history in front of witnesses who would never know the truth. How dare she reduce decades of sacrifice to a caricature she could dismiss with a single phrase? Across the table, I caught snippets of whispers. She really said that about her mom? Did you hear? She called her the past. Well, maybe it's true. Some parents just hold their kids back. Each hushed remark pierced like needles. None of them knew the cost of the nights I went without food so she could eat, the hours I bulled my hands raw scrubbing floors so she could afford ballet shoes. They only knew what Jennifer wanted them to know, that she was the future, and I was the relic she had survived. I clenched my napkin in my lap until the threads nearly tore. My body ached to respond, to rise from my chair and speak the truth out loud, to remind them all of the reality hidden beneath her polished smile. But the humiliation bound me tighter than ropes. I feared that if I opened my mouth, my voice would break under the weight of my grief, and tears would betray the dignity I still had left. So I sat frozen, my face carved into stillness, my heart thundering like a drum. Rage seethed beneath the surface, controlled but not extinguished. I watched her as she leaned in close to her friends, basking in their admiration, her laughter ringing like a bell. Each note was a hammer against my ribs, each smile a reminder of the line she had drawn, separating us into future and past. Inside me, though, a fire had begun. Quiet, restrained, but growing. It coiled in my chest, smoldering beneath the shame. The world may have accepted her narrative tonight, but I knew the truth. And I knew the truth had a way of returning, of demanding its place. For now, I remained silent. But my silence was not surrender. It was the stillness before the storm. The clatter of silverware and half-hearted conversation faltered as the waiter emerged with the cake. A murmur swept across the room, and for a moment the tension that had suffocated me lifted, displaced by the gleam of candles and the sparkle of sparklers crowning the chocolate confection. Cameras rose like weapons of light, their flashes striking against my eyes. I forced myself to stand when Jennifer beckoned me near, compelled by years of instinct, the instinct to be beside her, no matter how she wounded me. The cake was beautiful, layered in rich cocoa and cream, a masterpiece I had fought for in the bakery, down to the last curl of white chocolate on its edge. I remembered the little girl who once pressed her face to the glass of that same shop, eyes wide, whispering, "That one, Mom. That's the cake I want for my birthday." I remembered saving every spare dollar that year, denying myself even small indulgences, so that on her 8th birthday she could blow out candles on the cake of her dreams. Now she stood beside me, tall, radiant, unshakable, the knife gleaming in her hand as though it were a scepter. The room erupted in applause, her friends cheering, phones capturing every angle, as if this ritual belonged solely to her. She lifted the microphone with a practiced grace, her voice sharp and clear. "This cake isn't just sweet, it's symbolic. Today I cut ties with the past." The words fell like a blade, severing the fragile string that had tethered me to her. Gasps rippled through the crowd, a collective intake of breath that confirmed what I already knew. This was not an innocent slip of the tongue. This was a performance, a deliberate spectacle, staged with the precision of someone who had rehearsed their lines and chosen the perfect moment to strike. My vision blurred, as though the lights of the restaurant had suddenly turned cruel, exposing every wrinkle, every shadow of age upon my face. I heard the clink of glasses against plates, the shuffle of restless feet. I saw the shifting expressions, some shocked, some amused, some quietly satisfied, as the audience decided in real time whether to pity me, mock me, or simply erase me, just as she had. I stared at my daughter, but she was no longer my daughter in that moment. She was an executioner, severing her own blood, slicing away not just cake, but decades of history, sacrifice, and love. Each cut she made was a symbolic wound across my chest. She raised her chin, her smile unflinching, as if this betrayal was not cruelty but ceremony, an emancipation from the woman who had once been her anchor. Anger surged inside me, sharp and unstoppable, a flood pressing against the walls of my restraint. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from the sheer effort of holding myself still, of swallowing the scream that clawed at my throat. My body ached to lash out, to seize the microphone, to hurl the truth into the room until her image cracked beneath it. But I knew better. If I exploded now, if I let fury consume me in front of this audience, I would become exactly what she wanted me to be. A relic, pitiful, irrational, a caricature of bitterness. She had set a stage and baited me with humiliation, confident that I would stumble into her trap. I would not give her that victory. So I stood, spine rigid, eyes steady, while inside the fire roared. I studied every face in the crowd, searing their expressions into memory. I noted the ones who smirked, who whispered, who delighted in the spectacle. I catalogued the ones who turned away in discomfort, unwilling to confront the cruelty laid bare before them. Each reaction told me a story, not just of Jennifer, but of the silent audience complicit in her performance. The knife cut through chocolate, but it felt like it cut through me. I smelled the sweetness of sugar and cocoa, but all I tasted was iron, bitter and metallic, the taste of betrayal lingering at the back of my tongue. I tightened my fists at my sides, forcing my breathing to remain calm, even as my pulse hammered in my ears. There was no dignity in lashing out. Not here. Not tonight. Instead, I swallowed my rage and let it settle like a stone in the pit of my stomach. It weighed heavy, but it also steadied me. Beneath the humiliation, beneath the shame, something else began to take shape. Clarity. She thought she had won. She thought she had buried me with one sentence and a slice of cake. But I would not be buried. I needed to wait, to watch, to let the night unfold until the moment arrived where the truth could not be denied. My time would come. For now I wore my silence like armor, letting her believe she had stripped me of power. And as the guests clapped, as the cameras flashed, as Jennifer raised her first piece of cake to the crowd, I stood still, carrying the weight of betrayal with a fury that promised one thing. She would not erase me. Not now. Not ever. The cake had been cut, the photos taken, and the applause was settling into the hum of chatter again. Plates of cake moved down the table, forks clinking against porcelain, laughter returning in hesitant spurts. I sat stiffly in my chair, my smile carefully fixed, while the sting of humiliation still burned beneath my skin. I thought the worst of the evening had already passed. Then I heard it. Jennifer's boyfriend, Mark, leaned across the table to his friend, his voice carrying just far enough for me to catch the words. Now she's free from her mom's drama. No more old baggage. The syllables were careless, tossed like scraps to a dog, but they lodged deep inside me. Drama? Baggage? Was that what I had become in their eyes? An obstacle to her shining future, a relic cluttering her carefully curated life? My chest tightened. My mind clawed back through decades of sacrifice. The long nights mopping office floors while my hands bullowed, the winters I went without heat so she could have a new coat, the exhaustion I wore like a second skin so she could glide through the world untouched by want. That was drama. That was baggage. The word throbbed in me like an open wound. For the first time that evening, hatred threatened to consume me, not just for Jennifer's cruelty, but for the smug, dismissive tone of a man who had never known what it was to choose between rent and food, who had never borne the weight of another's survival. I nearly rose then, nearly demanded silence, but something, an instinct honed from years of waiting, of enduring, forced me still. And then fate intervened. The restaurant doors opened, and the manager approached with a stiff formality, an envelope in hand. He bowed slightly toward Jennifer. "This was delivered for you, miss. Marked urgent." The room stilled. Even the laughter dimmed. Jennifer, flushed with wine and adoration, took the envelope with a careless flick of her wrist, her grin never faltering. She slipped her finger beneath the seal and unfolded the papers, her movements casual, almost bored. But then her smile froze. Her eyes moved back and forth across the page, and color drained from her face. Her hand trembled, the paper rattling like a leaf caught in wind. A silence heavier than any before settled over the table, as though every guest sensed something had shifted. I watched her lips part in disbelief. My pulse quickened. "What is it?" someone asked from the far end. Jennifer didn't answer. Her gaze darted toward me, wide and unsteady, before falling back to the page. My breath caught. Something in her expression told me this was no trivial notice. Finally, she dropped the papers onto the table as if they burned her fingers. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand, fell to the floor, and shattered in a spray of glittering shards. The manager cleared his throat delicately. "It appears to be a legal notice. A trust release." Gasps traveled through the room. Whispers swirled, quick and hungry. I reached for the paper, my fingers steady though my heart thundered in my chest. My eyes scanned the lines, and then the truth struck me like a wave. The trust fund Gerald had left, our ghost, our absence, the man who had walked away, was releasing early. And the beneficiary was not Jennifer. It was me. For a moment, the room blurred. Gerald. After all these years, after all the scars he left behind, he had chosen me. He had rewritten his will before his death. Every share of his company, every scrap of his estate, every piece of the empire Jennifer must have assumed was hers, all of it, every line, every signature, pointed to me. Shock rippled outward like a stone cast into still water. Guests leaned in, eyes wide, mouths agape. I heard one whisper, "It's all hers?" Another gasped, "But why not the daughter?" Jennifer stood motionless, her face drained of its practiced radiance, her carefully built stage crumbling beneath her. The humiliation she had crafted for me only moments earlier now folded back upon her like a mirror turned cruel. She swayed, her hand gripping the back of her chair for balance, while the whispers grew louder, buzzing through the air like hornets. I felt a strange, steady calm. Not triumph, at least not yet, but something sharper, more precise. Vindication. The universe itself had spoken, cutting through her performance with a truth neither of us could control. She had sought to bury me, to dismiss me as the past, and yet here was the past rising from the grave, placing its weight in my hands, and saying, she was never gone. She was never nothing. Jennifer's eyes met mine across the table, and for the first time that night I saw fear flicker in them. Fear and something else, something that looked very much like regret. The glass at her feet glittered like ice, the fragments catching the golden light of the restaurant, shards of her certainty scattered across the floor. The room did not belong to her anymore. Jennifer's face drained of color until she looked like a porcelain doll left too long in the sun. Her lips parted, her breath shallow, and then came the desperate cry. This has to be a mistake. Her voice cracked, shattering the illusion of control she had worked so hard to maintain all evening. The guests, who had been clapping only moments earlier, now stared in silence, their expressions caught between confusion and curiosity. The same friends who cheered when she called me the past now leaned forward, hungry to understand how the woman she tried to erase suddenly stood at the center of everything. I remained still, hands folded neatly on the table, my posture unbending. The silence that followed her outburst was thick, suffocating, but it was not mine to bear. It wrapped around Jennifer instead, coiling tighter with every second she failed to explain away the truth. She turned wildly toward Mark, as if he might rescue her. His eyes darted down to his lap, his jaw tense, refusing to meet her gaze. Around her, whispers fluttered. What did it say? Her mom is the beneficiary? I thought everything was Jennifer's. Jennifer slammed her palm on the table, rattling glasses. It isn't fair. That's not how it was supposed to be. I rose slowly from my chair, not rushing, not raising my voice. My words came measured, deliberate, each syllable meant to cut cleaner than any blade. I was the one who stood by him, even after he left, I said, my gaze never wavering from hers. I was the one who never poisoned you against him, though I could have. I wanted you to love your father without bitterness. I carried the weight of his absence, so you didn't have to. The room was so quiet that even the clinking of a fork 2 tables away sounded thunderous. Jennifer's eyes flickered, wide and frantic, as if she could undo my words by sheer force of will. But I continued, my voice calm, almost gentle, though every word was a blade. And it seems, even in death, he knew who deserved his trust. The words landed, heavy and irreversible. For the first time in years, I felt something shift deep within me. Anger, sharp and cold, surged through me, not the wild, destructive fury I had feared, but a steel-hard anger that gave me strength. It straightened my spine, steadied my hands, and turned humiliation into fire tempered into resolve. I saw it then, Jennifer shrinking, her grandeur withering under the weight of reality. The woman who had strutted with a knife in her hand like a queen at coronation now trembled like a child stripped of her crown. She searched the faces around her, desperate for loyalty, for some flicker of validation. But where there had once been admiration, now there was doubt. Where there had been laughter, now there was unease. Her friends whispered behind manicured hands, their eyes sliding toward me, some curious, some sympathetic. Even those who had joined in her cruelty earlier now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one reached for her hand. No one rose to defend her. Jennifer's chest heaved as if the very air had turned against her. This isn't real. She doesn't deserve it. I'm the one who's built something, who's worked for everything I have. Her words ricocheted in the air, brittle, hollow. They carried none of the power she thought they held, only exposing the cracks in her composure. The very stage she had built for herself had become her undoing. And me? For the first time in decades, I wasn't the one shrinking. I didn't fidget or look away. I didn't apologize for existing or fold into silence to preserve her pride. I stood tall, steady, letting the truth settle like iron. The humiliation she had carved for me was now hers to bear. The tables had turned, and she knew it. I watched her chest rise and fall in sharp bursts, the sheen of sweat glistening at her hairline. Her hands, once so steady when clutching the microphone, now trembled visibly. The daughter who had declared herself the future looked suddenly like a child again, lost, cornered, fragile. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The weight of justice was doing the work for me. My silence was no longer weakness. It was power. My presence was no longer baggage. It was inevitability. I caught Linda's gaze across the table. Her eyes glimmered, not with pity this time, but with pride. She nodded once, a quiet confirmation of what I already knew. I had reclaimed my place. Jennifer could scream, deny, rage all she wanted. It didn't matter. The truth had spoken, and nothing could unwrite it. The room that had once shimmered with laughter and light now felt heavy, its air thick with unease. The party that was supposed to crown Jennifer, the celebration she had designed as her moment of glory, had shifted into something else entirely. It was no longer her coronation. It was her trial. Eyes that had sparkled for her earlier now slid away in discomfort. Conversations, once directed at her, curved around her like water skirting a stone. Even the applause that had filled the restaurant only minutes ago seemed like a memory from another lifetime, erased by the weight of revelation. The energy had turned, subtle but absolute. The crowd no longer leaned toward her. They leaned away. Jennifer stood rigid at the center of it all, her glass still shattered on the floor beside her, the fragments catching the light like pieces of her broken composure. Her hands trembled as she tried to regain control of the moment, but her voice, once so steady, had abandoned her. She looked from face to face, searching for loyalty, for someone. Anyone, to pull her back into the light she had basked in so easily. But no one answered. Even Mark, who had whispered earlier about me being baggage, shifted in his chair uncomfortably. When Jennifer turned to him with desperate eyes, he rose halfway, muttering something about a call he needed to take, before slipping into the crowd and disappearing toward the exit. His absence was louder than any accusation. The silence around her was deafening. It wasn't the silence of reverence. It was the silence of judgment. And in that silence, Jennifer trembled. The daughter who had once stood tall, dismissing me as the past, now stood small, cornered, her aura of confidence crumbling with each passing second. I didn't need to say another word. My defense had been spoken, not by my mouth, but by life itself. Gerald's will, his final act, had written the truth into stone, a truth stronger than any argument or plea. The future no longer belonged to her alone. It had shifted, and everyone in the room could see it. For the first time that evening, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. The anger that had burned inside me all night softened, cooling into something sharper, more satisfying: justice. Not the kind of justice I could have ever demanded, but the kind that arrived on its own, undeniable, untainted by rage. I rose from my chair quietly. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. The guests stepped aside instinctively, giving me space as though they understood that the center of the room no longer belonged to Jennifer. It belonged to me, if only for this moment. Their eyes followed me, some sympathetic, some cautious, but none dared to challenge the truth now laid bare. As I reached the door, I looked back once. Jennifer stood frozen, her face pale, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her isolation. The friends who had laughed with her earlier now whispered among themselves, their glances sharp with curiosity and suspicion. She was no longer the queen of the evening. She was the subject of its gossip. And then I stepped outside. The night air was cool, sharp against my skin, washing over me like a baptism. I closed my eyes and let the breeze carry away the residue of the humiliation, the ache of her words, the bitterness of the whispers. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because I had wounded her, not because I had struck back, but because I had not needed to. Life itself had balanced the scales. Satisfaction coursed through me, quiet and steady. It wasn't the satisfaction of revenge. It was the satisfaction of truth finally standing where it belonged. The world had seen what I had carried, what I had given, what I had endured, and in the end it had chosen to honor that, even when my own daughter could not. Jennifer had called me the past. She had tried to confine me to a shadow, to erase me in front of those whose opinions mattered most to her. But in that restaurant, under the golden lights and the weight of silence, everyone understood the truth. I was the one holding the future. That truth tasted sweeter than any cake, sweeter than any toast, sweeter than applause. It was the sweetness of dignity restored, of justice delivered without a scream, without a fight, delivered by the simple, undeniable hand of fate. And as I walked into the night, I carried it with me like a crown no one could strip away.